Good afternoon, AFA Warfare Symposium participants and distinguished guests. I'm Colonel Tim Sejba. I'm the PEO for Space Development here at the Space and Missile Systems Center. Wrapping up our day one events with an exciting panel on C4ISR and how it collects. Let me begin by welcoming and introducing our panel of industry leaders that bring exceptional experience from across the C4ISR arena. Joining me today are Mr. Jerome Dunn, Director, Strategic Mission Solutions for Combat Systems and Mission Readiness, Northrop Grumman Corporation. Mr. Luke Savoie, President, Aviation Services, L3 Harris. Mr. Matt Apostolou, Director, Business Development, Domestic Airborne ISR and Space Systems, Collins Aerospace. And Mr. Bill Power, Business Development Principal, Rotary and Mission Systems, Lockheed Martin Corporation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us and thank you for being part of today's panel. Over the last few decades, there has been increasing importance of battlespace situational awareness capabilities across the military operating domains. From the precision GPS strikes of the Gulf War, advancements in sensors and remote aircraft that aided in the war on terror, and now tremendous breakthroughs in artificial intelligence to help us digest the multitude of new data sources and the data that they provide. C4ISR has evolved to become a vital tool to maintain multi-domain dominance in an increasing threat environment. And make no mistake, the next great power competition is at our doorstep, and we must continue to advance our technologies and ConOps to build a robust and interoperable C4ISR infrastructure to remain the world's preeminent all-domain joint and allied force. Earlier today, you heard from a great in-depth JADC2 ABMS panel led by Mr. Preston Dunlop. JADC2 will play a significant role in the future C4ISR architecture and our battlespace capabilities. So in our panel today, to close out today's sessions, we'll hear from experts from across industry that are innovating in areas of multi-domain operations, innovative sensors, and onboard artificial intelligence, data fusion, and interoperability ConOps. So gentlemen, I'd like to give each of you a few minutes, 5 minutes or so each, to share some opening thoughts before we get into questions and answers from me and from the rest of our online participants. So Jerome, let's start with you. The floor is yours.
Great. Am I coming through loud and clear? Awesome. Thanks, Colonel. To be blunt, the Colonel kind of framed this well. We are entering a perilous time, one in desperate need of new ideas and innovations in C4ISR. As the Colonel mentioned, great power competition has required us to look at our C4I infrastructure and examine it for weaknesses. Unfortunately, we have found many, from limitations due to service stovepipes to policies that, quite frankly, artificially limit information access to real and also real technical blind spots and capability gaps that we have to fill. We've known for a while now that our near-peer adversaries, namely Russia and China, have the ability to deny us physical access. But what's more insidious is that they're fundamentally denying us the ability to complete our kill chains. This is really what is meant by them attacking our network and our ability to fight networked. This is our great strength. We relied on it for the Gulf War, as the Colonel mentioned. But this is kind of now our Achilles heel, especially since these near-peer adversaries, these great powers, have spent the last few decades kind of studying it and determining ways to disrupt that kill chain. So it's less about physical capability anymore. We've kind of cracked that nut on getting us, long-range penetrating capabilities. But disrupting that kill chain is just as insidious. It is that mission kill, and we have to correct that. I've had the privilege throughout my career at figuring out creative workarounds for some of these problems under difficult circumstances. But given the scale of the threats and the technical capabilities from the likes of like the Chinas and the Russias out there, and their ability to adapt quickly, relying on fragile one-off workarounds is not viable nor sustainable. We need a robust approach. We need to fundamentally rethink our C4ISR infrastructure and consider things like scalability and resiliency at the forefront at a whole different level, a peer level. Pretend that we're fighting ourselves. And that's kind of the landscape that we need to, that's kind of the mindset that we need to adopt as we design these systems and work out that infrastructure. And let's not forget that we're playing essentially an away game. right? And this is likely going to be the case in any future conflict. Now, strategically, this is a great advantage. Our adversaries are actually envious of it and wish they had it themselves. But tactically and technically, it's a huge disadvantage, right? C4ISR has always been our great equalizer in these types of fights. And yeah, the United States is the only one that pretty much operates a globalized military this way. Better intelligence has always been our force multiplier. We need to maintain this advantage to keep playing these away games, to maintain our strategic advantage. So really look forward to the discussions on the planet across the at AFA today and across the panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerome. I appreciate those opening thoughts. Luke, how about we go over to you for your opening thoughts here?
No, absolutely. And to piggyback on what Jerome said, I mean, well said. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session here, talking with those that have come in and with the rest of my panel members here. I think when we look at the trends in the C4ISR, you know, we kind of are at this pivot point, right? And we look at the previous, you know, couple of decades and the decades before that, you know, we were seeing a lot of different trends in both our connectivity, the aspects of which we operate in, the environments we operate in, and then how we apply technology in that. I think in the last 20 years, what we've seen is a high reliance on connectivity, but we've done it in very niche ways. Our SOCOM customers and what they've done have proven highly connective networks focused on targets can do things very, very fast. In the 90s, we had decision cycles measured in days, 72-hour ATO cycles. And then in the last 20 years, we've reduced that down to minutes, right? We've gotten down to things in single-digit minutes in terms of our decision cycle, our ability to find, fix, finish, follow up, and repeat that chain on focused targets. And now we're in this pivot area where now how do we take that highly connective tissue, but now we have to do this in completely contested environments. And so, and those contested environments aren't just about physical contention, like Jerome said. It's not about just access to areas. Now the spectrum, we no longer have spectrum dominance. And now you get into this other commodity, which is this commodity of processing. And so we found, in the age of the UAV and the RPA, the ability to have processing in the backhaul and being able to get data out of an environment into another environment where you have the ability to do that. And a lot of the trends we're seeing now is it's cliche to say processing on the edge, but that's out of necessity, not out of desirement, which is, hey, we need to have processing further and further forward. And what type of processing should that be? How do we apply AI smartly in the edge? And oh, by the way, the edge now is space denied or space contested. So now it's point-to-point solutions, resilient connectivity. How do we get processing disaggregated, and how do we do disaggregated processing so that the sum of the parts is greater than just the sum of the parts is greater than the total? So a lot of these things that we see out there. As we look at this as well, we have to look at the cycle of which we innovate, right? So we hear a lot about open systems as trends. I'm looking forward to questions around that. And how do we develop our next generation of platforms that allow our ability to get, our C4ISR systems are the most sensitive to technology advancements, which means we need to be able to insert technology at faster and faster paces, which also means if we're doing that on the edge, that's happening in platforms. And we have to be able to innovate on those platforms around certifications, around flight airworthiness, around all of these things. And in physical environments that are very difficult, we have to innovate quicker. And that really, the crux of that is our open mission system standards. How do we develop at the clean sheet level? How do we take our legacy fleet and enable our legacy fleets to be capable of these things? I'm looking forward to the conversation today around that and with my panel members, and looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Luke. And I think we'll come. Matt, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, please. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Colonel. Yeah, Matt Apostolou here with Collins Aerospace Systems, Director of Business Development for our ISR and space portfolio. And, my division for the last several years has really been focused on a lot of what Jerome and Luke have just touched on, is really that compression and securing of of our kill chain, right? And that involves the 4 real pillars of C4ISR in my, in my view, of resilient networks, where we talked a little bit about autonomy, which Luke touched on somewhat there too. Smart sensing, which I'll talk to some here. And then I think the 4th thing that I think it often gets left out of this discussion when we talk about C4ISR is really the people piece of it, right? How are we indoctrinating? How are we training? How are we getting people used to this new paradigm of operation that we're moving into? So from the smart sensing side of things, I'm an old-fashioned imagery guy. I love a crisp overhead image. There's nothing prettier than something like that, and it's a great lethality enhancing tool, right? But that lethality is painstaking. It takes a long time to get to the lethality based off of that kind of data. So we have to get out of this mode of single source intel and single collection, and really start going into this multimodality, self-actuated sensing systems and data sets that are able to self-identify gaps, identify other sources outside of their own platforms, and then bring those sources in to create this larger picture that really enables that lethality that we're talking about. And that's hard to do when you're used to doing everything yourself, right? When you're used to dropping a point and actually telling something to do something, to get used to that paradigm shift as an operator is a big step, right? And what, the last piece of this that we really need to, I think, focus the technology and our corporate and I say corporate as, corporate and corporate as in military efforts on is how are we getting people into that mindset of operating in this very new paradigm. So I'm looking forward to questions on that. And from Collins's standpoint, our passion really is bringing our technologies, our ideas, and our people into that fight, creating demonstrations, exercises, experiments in real world denied scenarios and environments that we can actually bring that, get those reps, build that muscle memory, and really start building the future of how our operators are operating, not just our technology.
Great. Thanks, Matt, for those opening thoughts. And again, a couple themes I'm sure we'll hear more about here as we go forward. So finally, I'll turn it over to Bill Powers. Bill, if you want to start off some opening thoughts here.
Yeah, thank you. A privilege to be here with you all today, and thanks to the FAA for the opportunity. The bottom line for C4ISR is we need to provide revolutionary technology that simplifies a very complex environment to enable better, faster decisions. Simple phrase, right? But the crux of it lies in how difficult it is to actually simplify, how actually difficult it is to make those decisions better and certainly faster as we move into an age where AI and ML kind of capabilities are going to demand some pretty significant doctrinal and operational changes to the way we even think about C2. All of that's very complex and will take a lot of working through. LM's been very focused on open systems and open architectures, hardware designs, software, the developmental approaches for that software, and all the related communication standards where we've got some particular emphasis places of note. One is in the development and the evolution continually of the open message standards. We've been very actively involved with that for a long time. But we've also been a very significant contributor to the OMS library of capabilities that are out there. We're really starting to see the benefits of the approach that the Air Force took with the CMCC as an example. Now online, and we're fairly certain that that's going to grow in scope and strategic value as everybody comes to understand how good that approach is going to be at keeping us dynamic and adaptive in terms of the software capabilities that we deploy going forward. We've also been working pretty hard. I think it was General Robinson and General Carlisle that had an interchange in one of these forums one time where one of them said, it's important that we have this stuff that's always looking backward too, because we've got so much energy invested in capabilities that are, I don't want to use the term legacy. The way it was defined this morning, that sounds kind of bad from a Chief Brown perspective, but for the things that are modern and still very relevant in the battle space in our capability mix, but things that also have to look forward was what and remain adaptive and everything. So we've been working very hard to take the big legacy programs that we're involved with and making sure that they do retain the ability to connect to systems that are existent. I'll just say extant systems. That's probably less loaded term than legacy, and the ability to look forward. One of those, as an example, is Aegis. We've spent several years transforming the Aegis system into a series of modular, segregable capability packages. The resultant common source library has got lots of advantages. First among them is that you now can take functional capabilities of Aegis and deploy it into certain circumstances without having it be the whole package. It can be certain pieces and services and capabilities within Aegis that can go somewhere else. But more importantly, it has actually helped facilitate the virtualization of Aegis. Why am I talking about Aegis at an AFA? Well, it's not to try to indoctrinate Air Force folks, of which I'm a retired one. It's really to say that virtualization is probably going to be the mechanism in a JADC2 environment that we can ultimately bridge the ABMS and the U.S. Navy's concept going forward of JADC2, and potentially who knows where it could go. I mean, the systems could be co-located in the future, joint C2 node, many things like that. So that's an important thing that has been an active and important going forward, that we continue to do those kind of things. Further, we've been very serious about a transformation to the digital engineering and DevSecOps approaches to doing things. And I'm sure that's easy to say. It's really hard to do in practice when you're talking about a very large multi-business area corporation. But we've been very earnestly working toward that. We've embraced the principles of Agile DevSecOps in totality and are deploying it across the corporation. And we're finding very good results from it in terms of bringing rapid capability development and being able to bring things to the government at a lower net cost. We've also worked closely with the government on software factories, where we've been onboarded with Platform One. We've deployed our own instantiation of the party bus, which I almost still can't say without giggling a little bit, for the Platform One architecture, and we're standing up those capabilities to follow the lead that the Air Force is setting in terms of how they want to do software development going forward. We look forward to the next stages of how that may go and where the services may go with that acquisition model. We've also worked very closely with UHC stakeholders and wargaming and experimentation activities. From topical white papers to supporting major strategic COCOM exercises. We've done rapid capability demos. We've done things that are helping to stitch together different pieces of the joint battle space, cross-domain, cross-service, and many of those kinds of activities have been very much at the fore of our activities, and we think it's strategically very important. The goal is to essentially help the U.S. government think through the upcoming organizing constructs and evolutions in BMC2 that we know are going to have to happen. Extend that out to options for allied interoperability. And the ultimate aim is to just help the COCOM close those capability gaps. That has to stay all of our focus to some extent, because it's the key description of what the warfighter actually wants. However that vision evolves for JADO and JADC2 for the U.S. government, we all need to stay forward thinking, but bring along all those capabilities that we've got as well, and we have to develop that ConOps concurrently with the development and fielding of technology. And that's a very important part that I hope we have some questions about today, because it's important, especially when we're talking about things that are really step function disruptions of the status quo in operations, that we thoroughly think through the ConOps and all the ramifications, and that we do so concurrently with the actual development of the technology.
Great. Thanks a lot, Bill. And thanks to all the panel members for those opening thoughts. Certainly has set a great foundation, I think, for the rest of the questions that we're going to delve into here as we start. So I'm going to start with a few questions. I'll call out each one of the panel members with a specific question. After they've completed, for all the rest of the panel members, please feel free to jump in and then we'll move on to the other questions. For those that are online and joining us as part of the audience, if you've got questions for the panel members, please continue to submit those via the online Q&A function, and we'll get to those here in just a few minutes. So the first question goes to Jerome Dunn from Northrop Grumman. So the question is we heard earlier today from the JADC2 panel, how does C4ISR differ from what JADC2 is?
All right. Well, this is kind of a big question, but I'll try to break it down into easily bite-sized chunks. To me, technically, the core differences between JADC2 and what I call classic C4ISR, because we're all trying to work on whatever's going to be next, center around kind of three key capability enhancements over what would be considered classic C4ISR. The first is the enhancement that would be needed to be had to make it real time. Classic C4ISR, especially that ISR portion, has not been that traditionally. Traditionally, you know, you probably heard of it. It requires an analyst or a person in the loop to provide that, make that usable, actionable intelligence. That is not real time. And especially when we're talking about at scale, as I mentioned, as well as many of the other panel members mentioned, especially in great power competition, that real time aspect at scale is going to be absolutely necessary. So what we're getting down to here is really what we call combat ID. This ability now to be able to fuse that information, possibly with AI/ML enhancements, so that we can get intent. We not only get the target itself, but we get what it's about to do. And that gives us combat ID and an ability to take real-time action. The second key technical aspect that I think is going to be a difference between a JADC2 or a C4ISR classic is quality of service. You know, we are looking to tie sensors with shooters, and different shooters require different levels of qualities of service, whether we're talking about different interceptors for missile defense or different strike weapons for a strike system. That quality of service differs, and some require little quality of service, meaning, you know, location error and latency. Others require exquisite quality of service for you to engage. Being able to do that, possibly via exquisite sensor fusion, is a way to do that, is a way to crack that nut. And then finally, the third one, and of course, you know, this one's kind of in the name, is that joint aspect. Classic C4ISR is stovepiped. We have service-specific C2 systems. We have intelligence-specific ISR systems. In the future, especially at scale and the resiliency we need any sensor best shooter, regardless of the service that owns it, regardless of the intelligence entity that owns it. And that ability to really offer true joint is what's needed. So these three aspects, real-time, quality of service, and joint, is what separates JADC2 from classic C4ISR. Now, in a sense, JADC2 is making C4ISR, essentially JADC2 is just C4ISR, just made joint and technically actionable. So maybe one day there'll be one in the same. I actually hope that one day there'll be one in the same, right? But for right now, when we're talking about what the difference is and why probably the morning session was talking all about JADC2, technically it's these three aspects. And you know, we're working hard on that and would love to see great ideas mature in these areas. Thanks.
Thoughts from any of the other panel members on that? It's like Matt, over to you.
So I mean, that was a great answer, Jerome. I think that, you know, you hit the three pillars, and you know, JADC2 is the evolution of C4ISR. Absolutely, 100%. You know, and I think one of the other nuances that is really that you said joint, but then all domain too, right? So we have burgeoning domains coming out, right? We have the cyber domain, space is becoming, you know, more and more of its own fleshed out military domain. I think really incorporating those new lessons learned, those new operational paradigms that aren't quite yet discovered in those domains, and integrating those into more traditional, into, you know, I'll use the dirty word, legacy systems, and figuring out how do we integrate, how do we fuse, how do we smartly collate all of that data into an intelligence picture is really the critical piece of JADC2. And you know, we look at that, and that becomes kind of the city on the hill, you know, the lighthouse that we're shooting for, you know, and then we're sitting here still operating today in the traditional ISR, and starting to squeeze those bookends together is really where we need to get get to the rubber meeting the road here.
Great, thanks, Matt. Any final thoughts from either Luke or Bill on that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question here. Okay, all right. Well, the next question then is actually for Luke from L3 Harris. So, in your opening comments, you talked a little bit about artificial intelligence. So, where is the most useful or impactful integration of artificial intelligence on the edge as we go forward?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I kind of said before, and like we've talked about, I think a lot in some of the, these opening remarks in the first set of questions is the contested environment, right? In the business I'm in, I deal a lot with this question of where AI should be. And, in the RPA world, it's kind of easy, right? Hey, you're in a nice air conditioned room. You got, unlimited power that's coming to you from a nearby metropolitan city that you're parked next to. And you don't worry about those things. So how really, you can do whatever you want. So when we're looking at in the edge in a contested environment, I don't have backhaul, so I have limited processing. And so then we really have to look to the analogous areas in industry. And really it is on the automotive side where you look at the advancements of this, right? And you look at, hey, on a Tesla, on its auto drive feature, does it have a repository of every permutation of what a stop sign looks like? No. And on a piece of processing element that isn't an FPGA, it's not an RTOS, it's not all of these things that we do in the aerospace business that make it highly complex. It's a GPU-based system from NVIDIA that they're running in there, and they teach an AI, hey, this is what a stop sign looks like. And it just knows what a stop sign is. So having those types of things that we put at the edge of things that we spend a lot of brain power of operators doing. Think of passive station keeping of jets, right? I look over, and I inherently as a pilot, which, I used to be, I look over my shoulder, I see a jet out there, and I know, hey, about how far that person is. I know where they're at in space to me. And with our DAS systems, teaching AIs to do that at the edge, that's how we're capable. That's a direct analogous thing. You could literally use an automotive AI and just teach it differently and do that in very, very low power and very, very low processing. So we look at those things and we look at the trivial things that we do every day. Now we need to put our brains down where we're, hey, cranium looking at, our wide portrait screen and all the other data that's coming through it. How do we offload tasks that allow us to put our stuff towards other things? And those are just examples of applying that at the edge. We look at ISR. I always talk about, I spent so much time counting vehicles and counting people down there. That's something that an AI, I don't need a crazy image processing algorithm. Hey, this is what a car is. This is what a truck is. Quite frankly, I can teach an AI to tell me that that's a Mercedes-Benz. And once again, it isn't looking at a huge repository of things. It just knows. And teaching it doesn't make it get bigger, right? So from a storage capacity, from a processing capacity, when you teach these things, they don't require more storage and they don't require more processing. They just become smarter. And teaching them to do trivial things and then presenting that to us in ways that it's instantaneous for us to go, yeah, I'm looking at 14 vehicles down there, 3 males, 2 females, and 1 child. I just read that off of a piece of text at the bottom of the screen. I didn't have to sit there and count that. All the while, hey, my wingman is 1.5 clicks at the 7 o'clock. Those are all things where very useful and easy to transition pieces of AI into the edge with very low processing. I think those are just some good examples of how to apply it as part of our everyday operations and platforms that exist today.
Great, thanks, Luke. Any other thoughts or comments from anybody on the panel for that one?
Yeah, this is Jerome. So, I think, and as we look forward as to where AI, why AI probably now is the right time to definitely incorporate it, is again, the scale problem. As we look forward and we look at both the defense and the strike missions, especially as we're involved in the joint force, where now we have like tons more options, the level of ambiguity is tremendous. That means both overlaps in terms of engagement zones and overlaps in terms of strike zones, right? Making that best choice should not be and cannot be arbitrary. It has to be something, especially at this scale, where we're possibly talking about thousands of sorties or engagements. at any one time, happening over a very short window of time. This is where AI is needed because of that ambiguity. And we're working through some of that now. The good news is it doesn't always require AI, right? A lot of these can be done deterministically, which at the end of the day is still best. But there are a lot of cases where the ambiguity does not have a deterministic answer. And those are where we will have to think hard on how we're going to utilize that info and to make it actionable at an instance at scale. Anyway, that's just it.
Great. No, thanks a lot. And that actually is a great segue, I think, kind of into our next question, which I'm going to lead to Matt. And it's along the lines of scalability. So it's kind of building upon some of those thoughts. Certainly, there was several panel members that opening comments talked about exercises and demonstrations. But what really are some of the challenges you see from an industry standpoint as we look to scale this C4ISR capabilities, not only for the joint force, but also across allies and coalitions in the future?
Yeah, so thank you. That's a really challenging question. You know, you look at everything that Luke and Jerome have already addressed, and I really think it comes down to really three things that are our biggest challenges in industry. First is speed, right? Nobody's fast enough, right? We're always late to need. It's constant, right? So we look at, you know, the digital engineering initiatives that are out there so that we can, you know, build digital twins of existing models, right? And that becomes the scalability framework. So you can build a digital model and be able to scale it up or down as needed to fit the various platforms, right? So that's an advantage when you started talking about digital engineering, but then it's also a disadvantage because nobody believes the model until you actually build it and put it on a platform, right? So that's one of the big challenges, I think, is translating that digital engineering piece into reality. Second is confidence, right? So if you're doing digital engineering, you're doing exercises, you're doing simulations and modeling, you know, exercises are great, but that's not the fight, right? Until you get into the fight, sometimes it's hard to know and build that belief, build that confidence, build that muscle memory I talked about earlier. And the flip side of that is the technical confidence. Is it reliable? Is this thing that you've built quickly available, always up? In that commercial model where, you know, downtime is death, you know, are we building systems that are so reliable, so persistent, so self-repairing, right, that we never have that downtime? And then the third piece of this, I think, is a challenge is we've talked, this word's come up a bunch of times already, stovepipe. You know, we need ubiquity. You need access. You need, you know, a multi-domain solution where people can go and find all of these things across coalitions, between joint services, between, you know, even, you know, between different aspects of the same service. And really those three things build up to this trust in industry that we are providing the things that the customer is asking for, you know, and trying to really build and processize building trust by being alongside, being partners, and knowing our people and the technologies and how they use them better moving forward.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Any other thoughts from the panel on that question?
I can offer one. You know, one of the things that challenge our scale is actually our baggage. That means we have a lot of existing systems. I kind of heard some of the members on the panel already talk about this, which we have to bring into the fight because it's unreasonable to say that those aren't going to be those are going to be replaced, you know, for this fight. We're still going to have all those systems that we built before we consider this type of adversary or before we consider this type of construct or this type of conflict. Scale requires that we be able to bring those systems into a networked fight as well, and possibly used in ways that they were never originally designed. And what this means is, and I may be, you know, I may be controversial in this point, is we can't have too many, a network that requires so many rigid set standards. We need a way of being able to bring in existing systems, incorporate new systems so flexibly that we don't need to redefine or reinvent the wheel or the network or the systems or re-engineer them to make them work. And this way we can bring our existing arsenal to the fight and make it what everyone has said, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So part of that scale is making best hay with what we got. And so I do want to put that out there, because that is fundamental to whatever this next architecture is, whether it's JADC2, C4ISR, or any other collection of Cs that you decide to put together. Thanks.
Great. No, thanks. Okay, here's the last question for me before we turn to the audience, because we've got quite a few questions that are coming in. So the last question is over to Bill from Lockheed Martin. So from your perspectives on the, what are your perspectives on development of ConOps and kind of the deployment of capabilities when we field new C4ISR technologies, and how we determine when they're mature enough and ready for fielding?
Thank you. The exploration of ConOps for a new technology is truly an imperative, and especially, as I mentioned before, when we're advancing capabilities that significantly disrupt the operational, or for that matter, the legal or doctrinal status quo. A lot of the things that we're talking about here in terms of the need to be able to rapidly deploy a new capability, it's easy for us to forget on the development side that we've got a huge logistics tail. That you're not going to take an AI in front of a flight evaluation board, or there's not going to be a lawsuit that's suing the AI if it makes a bad decision, and that's one of our big challenges. We need to remember that whatever technology goes out, there's this gigantic trail of training, of preparation for a warfighter that ultimately has to be certified by his unit to go out and execute a mission according to a very well-defined set of ROE. And this kind of thing is not going to be an easy evolution. And that's why it's all the more important that we do the, experiments, wargaming, et cetera, at every level, from strategic all the way down to tactical types of events, to try to create an environment and create the rule sets by which future warfighters can either operate and understand the rules for adaptivity as they're working. We've been very active in a range of activities there, and connecting the force in ways that pass the information around is really one of the best and first challenges that we've got. We live in an important time. The lightning bolts from the traditional, very complex OV1s that we used to make fun of because it seemed like you were painting pixie dust all over everything, have really gotten to a point now where they're being solved by resilient communications. We've done demonstrations that have shown the connectivity between our 5th gen assets in support of ABMS's Gateway 1 on-ramps. We've done some demos that have shown, for instance, the movement and the value of 5th gen data bridged between an F-35, a U-2, and down to a mobile ground station, where we've actually shown that the value of that data can actually support missile defense missions and significantly reduce the data to decision timelines. These sorts of things show the value of what you can do with the 5th gen sensors that are out there today. But imagine when you can distill and distribute that around to any other participant in the joint network that might want to receive benefit of that. I mentioned the link to COCOMs earlier. COCOMs have very specific needs, and one of the things that we need to do is to help them be a part of that experimentation and ConOps development cycle. That's part of why COCOMs have been screaming for a long time. We don't want to pay for a jazz hands flashy demo that comes and shines brightly for a few minutes in a demo and then disappears. They want leave behind capabilities. And that's one of the things that I think we all need to work together to make sure that we can leave some relevant, operationally useful or telling capabilities behind whenever we do these types of activities. We, for instance, have just worked on leaving an entire suite from some of our Valiant Shield exercise work behind for Indo-PACOM, just so that they can have it. They can do their own experimentation with it. They can run through ConOps. They can figure out ways that they want to employ and evolve their C2 and associated usage of that system. The activities that we've done over a whole couple of years in support of showing specifically, okay, we're going to take that lightning bolt on now. Now we're going to take these 2 lightning bolts on, and we've shown a degree of connectivity now across the force through joint gateways with a series of experiments that we've done. That we're truly at a very amazing time where so many of the things that we thought were nirvana in the past are really right upon us. And it's going to be imperative that we simultaneously work concurrently in that ConOps development so that things can be fielded without the warfighter feeling like something's pitched over the fence to them. Now, warfighters adapt to those kind of things. And in my, I've seen that happen in the RPA community where things came really fast, and it takes a lot of work and effort after the fact for the warfighters to figure out, well, what can I do with this? That's a scenario that can happen, but it's not the ideal one for the way to field an activity or a capability. So that's it.
No, great. Thanks, Bill. And Matt, I know that in your opening comments, you had some similar themes there, especially on the people side. Do you want to expand any on that or any other additional thoughts?
For sure. Yeah, Bill, great answers there. I look at a lot of what you and our companies, we've been involved with the U2 demo and those things, with you guys as well. I look at what the user really needs and how an analyst or a pilot ingests and consumes this information that they're getting. And really a lot of this comes down to usability issues, right? So we can't make a complex PhD level sensing system or network system that requires months and months and years of training for an Air Force operator to use. I mean, obviously there's always going to be some training, but it's got to look and feel and taste and smell a lot like what they're used to using already, right? So being able to take existing tool sets, legacy systems, and be able to incorporate these new ideas and then advance the front ends or the back ends as necessary to really drive that innovative utility forward is really the critical piece here. And we as Collins are one making a lot of investment in usability. How do we get complex sensing systems to be easier for somebody to click and point and click and get what they want, or look and feel like what a lot of people are used to today. And I think that really pushing that and then pairing that with the repetitious use of these things both in simulations and in real world situations and exercises and demos is critical. And then the other piece that you said, Bill, was that leave behind capability. We can't go and just roll out a one-time shiny object that took the best and brightest of a DGS operational system or engineering team to go and show, hey, this is what we can do. We have to be able to translate that into something that the actual operational squadrons can ingest, processize, and repeat, right? If it's not repeatable, it's not a product.
No, thanks a lot, Matt. And definitely resonate with all those thoughts from across the panel here. So now we've got quite a few questions that have come in from the audience. So with the time we've got remaining, before we wrap things up, I want to just fire a few of those off to the panel. So Luke, I'm going to start with you. The question came in and says, can you expand on how we as leaders can bring in tech agility and flexibility to the warfighter in a way that does not overburden continuation training demands at all the tactical levels?
Yeah, for sure. And this is a continuation of kind of the discussion we've kind of been having. I mean, one is bringing, the warfighter is not an afterthought, right? There is no kicking it over to the fence. One, you have to integrate them into your processes, even in an industry. In my company and stuff that we do, we kind of led on customer touch points. And changes even at the customer side where they adapted. And, I was one of those people back in 2005 where I went and lived neat and breathed with the contractor. I took delivery of the airplane, then deployed with it and then taught everybody. But also then you also kind of need to look at, how do you change, with more modern systems. There is the enduring, not legacy, but the enduring capabilities, but they don't transcribe very well, right? 3-panel MFDs with bezel keys and the OFP that goes with that doesn't translate well to a desktop app. But there are people who, who do that. And we really, you know, I used to fly AC-130s. We got OFP updates, you know, once a decade, right? And even then you'd get like a little N, you get like a floating north in your HUD, and it took 5 years to do. And then in these other fleets that I went on to go do, you know, we were doing OFP releases 3 times a year, 4 times a year. But the day that you released that OFP, the sim got updated, the classrooms got updated, and every unit member was taking home a piece of software installed on their desktop where they could run that. And so getting inside that cycle that starts with customer touch points, having them involved in the development process. Agile allows you to do that, right? You know, one of the biggest complaints from my customers was when they lost their access to Teams when I went through an IT refresh, and they lost access to me posting stuff on Yammer. Now it's called Teams, because I used to update and post the QA results of a piece of software and get customer feedback. And there was people in the Air Force who had a live feed of the QA results of the OFP and provided live feedback. You never delivered something that the customer wasn't familiar with because they were involved intimately with its development. And that's really how you're able to develop fast, and it does not become a burden. The other thing I would say is, from a human capital perspective, from people, they will rise to that challenge. There was a lot of antiquated thinking or just past thinking of, hey, it takes 6 months to train someone, it takes another 6 months to do X, Y, and Z. But the reality is that just the next generation, the current generation that's out there, absorbs, especially the technology types of things, a lot better. And that's why we see things like Reforge, UPT Next, and all of that with high success. Doing that in the mission system side and just doing that as a matter of practice is what we're doing now with all capabilities. And I think that's how we reduce the continuation training burden.
All right, no, thanks a lot, Luke. I appreciate that. So here's the next question from the audience. Where do you see growth or challenges in the DoD budget as it pertains to enhancing our capabilities on ISR dominance? And do you believe the investments will be more on the space side of things or on the air domain side?
I'll speak up here really quick. But I think it'll be both. I think the answer is both. Unfortunately for space, it's a very predictable element, right? I mean, it's a new domain. You know, we see things like Agile launch out there. So how do you populate LEO, you know, in a dynamic way? Otherwise, it becomes very predictable. So while, you know, space is an investment, it is a domain, a service, et cetera. It has its own sets of vulnerabilities. And so I think you'll see kind of a both type of thing. We still need an air breather component, especially in a space denied environment. I think that air breather component takes on a different look in terms of which portions of the air column it's in, the types of things that operate in it. We kind of see a pivot, you know, the middle column's gone and we're all going high and low. But so I think you'll still see an air breather component to it, but I think the answer is both.
I'd 100% agree with you, Luke. I think the answer is absolutely both. I won't speculate on what the budget's going to do, but you know, I believe, and I think our colleagues at Lockheed would agree as well, that the integration between air, space, mid, high, low, out is all becoming the same. You know, it's the same thread that we're going to start pulling to really get the situational awareness and the effects that we're looking for.
I will add that, you know, I also agree with the audience that there's probably going to be investments in both. It'll be interesting to see which investments ultimately pan out given the threat landscape. But space is where there is a revolution that is going on right now. And it's on the commercial side, you know, a lot. And so there is an argument to be made, which is, do we look at the way we do space deterrence differently now that we're not the only players there, right? And when we look at that, there are certain resiliency factors which are not so obvious. And so balancing that with the needs that we need beyond line of sight, that is no doubt, and what we define as a denied environment, I think is interesting, especially as we think about C4ISR. So I just want to put that out there because it's definitely a topic worth debating, and especially as the landscape changes and is so dynamic. Again, we are not the only investors in space right now.
No, thanks, Jerome. All right, so one last question here, and then I'm going to turn it back over to the panel members for some closing thoughts. So in the last few minutes here, as the Air Force pivots to high-end deterrence operations, what capabilities are being discussed for platforms in order to keep them relevant in tomorrow's fight? And I think that's along the lines of what we just kind of talked about. So I'll turn that over to any of the panel members that'd like to answer that one.
I mean, there is one obvious one. I'll just put it out there. I mean, I think everyone will agree. We have weapons with much longer legs nowadays. I mean, we're rapidly developing long-range fires with precision. We're rapidly developing different ways of striking potentially from outside that zone. The secret will be, how do we maintain custody and complete that kill chain for those systems? If we can do that, and C4ISR is a necessary component for that, we can complete that. If we don't, well, then that's a wasted investment. So as far as modifications, I think the technologies are going to be there. How we connect it up so that we can use it is going to be where the secret's going to be at.
Yeah, and I'd echo that, Jerome. I mean, this is not a technology problem; it's an integration. At the end of the day, really.
Yeah, and I would say also, I think the end of the day, we're not going to see any. I mean, there was some questions that were in the queue there on the MQ9 and other things. I think the MQX, draft spec was telling. We're never going to make anything that isn't armed again, doesn't have some aspect of LO to it, and isn't multimodal in nature, right? We're not going to take the EOIR sensor off and then put a radar on, right? Unless it's attritable. So I mean, the reality is those are aspects of the platforms of the future. It's just that the time-sensitive targeting, the ability to pivot at the edge means you got to have a kinetic effect. If you don't have a kinetic effect, you're worthless. Whether it is kinetic in the spectrum sense or kinetic on target, you're kind of a bystander, not a contributor. And so it's those are kind of like those themes that you kind of see as we pivot to that. We're not going to make in large scale, these vulnerable assets that do single things.
No, thanks a lot, Luke. All right, so that I think completes our time as far as audience questions. So I want to leave just a minute for each one of the panel members to kind of wrap things up. How about we go in reverse order here? I'm going to start with Bill Power for any just final thoughts or comments that you'd like to share with the audience.
Sure, thank you. Well, again, thanks for the panel opportunity today. An interesting point. When I was working for the chief, a number of years back doing strategic wargaming, one of the things that I was doing was to try to help ascertain the threat to our comms environment. And I went back and I interviewed both the current and the previous 4 commanders of the Warfare Center. And every single one of them all felt like we were underplaying our ability to adapt and actually work in a case where we had comms denied environments, not just out at the forward edge, but where we had mischief that was affecting us locally. I would say from a C4ISR perspective, that's one of the key things that we need to think through more thoroughly. We need to include it as key topicality in our war games as we figure out, CONOPS for how we're going to do C2 delegation and the rules of the road for how a segregated piece of our force, goes through the assumption of C2 authorities to actually continue the fight. I think that's an underplayed element of the force and of the activities that are going on in C4ISR right now. We can't get too magically entranced at the advancing technology and forget the core connectivity that we're going to have challenged at more than just the forward edge. And I'll leave it at that. I know your time is short to get through everybody. Thank you.
And I'll follow that up pretty quickly. Bill, I agree. And my question always comes down to this is what happens when the robots fail us? What are we going to do when it's a guy in a cockpit out there that still has to execute and prosecute a war? How do we still, and that brings it back to the people side of this, how do we train that lethality? How do we ingrain that lethality in our force, at a very fundamental level and move that forward so that we're all operating at that kind of level of thought.
Thanks, Matt. Luke, over to you for final thoughts.
Yeah, I'll actually, for final thought, I'll just continue on that, right? So I think, you know, in with that challenge, both in Garrison on the edge, and then when we talk about this, it isn't exactly, it's not just about tech, but it is also about how we think. I always like to say, you know, while some niche organizations and units do very hyper-focused things, if you look at what makes them successful, they have no prescribed thing. I always like to say there is no spoon, right? They have no prescribed O plan to take down a building that they identified a guy was at 20 minutes ago, right? That is the norm now in the conventional force. When we look at the period of, you know, the great power competition, that's how it's going to be in a dynamic environment. And to that exact point, we as operators have to think the same way. There is no, hey, what did my last rev of my 3-1 say on what to apply here? No, it's a way of thinking. And so how our connectivity tissue on our networks changes, that has to change also how we think as operators, and our ability to assimilate and learn, make decisions, be semi-autonomous ourselves, and make good decisions that have an effect on the overall objective. So I'll end it with that. So thanks.
Thank you, Luke, and over to you, Jerome.
Hey, I think I'm at a disadvantage here. I'm a technologist. I may be the only one on the panel that was not an operator. So, so sorry, I can't run with that thread. But what I can do is, since I opened with the kill chain, I can end with the kill chain, right? So at the end of the day, you know, whether we call it C4ISR or JADC2, it's about linking sensors with effectors, right? Better and more efficiently. Given the technical revolutions that are now already underway in the area of space-enabled beyond line-of-sight sensing, penetrating fires, long-range fires, and things like hypersonics, we will have the tools in place if we only choose to use it and enable them with a better C4ISR. And so that's really the challenge, right? Let's make it so that we can really make those systems much better and relevant in this kind of great power competition that we're all undergoing now. So anyway, that's it for me.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panel. Thank you for not only the innovation that each of you and your companies are bringing, but for your leadership in providing warfighting capabilities to our joint force. We thank you for that. A special thank you to AFA for hosting today's panel and today's first day of the conference. Certainly a special thanks to Lieutenant General Tired Wright, Ms. Bridget Dungu for all the logistics, and her entire team. That's been working tirelessly behind the scenes to pull this together in a COVID environment. And thank you to all the folks that attended online and for submitting questions. Have a great evening, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time the last couple of weeks, and thanks for your back and forth. Great discussions, moderating. I'm going to go back and listen afterwards. There's a lot of things that I want to listen to a second time. So thanks for your thoughts on this.